Could a type 2 diabetic learn anything from a type 1? Yep, sure could. In fact, you could learn a whole lot. On today's episode of Beat Diabetes, I'll be interviewing a sharp young guy named Adwan who was told, take so much insulin and have a good life. But Adwan was not content with that. And after doing some research, he discovered some things that have improved his health remarkably and tamed the diabetes that threatened to shorten his life and give him constant hypos. You have got to see this interview. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat today and another first with our interviews. This is the first type 1 diabetic that I have interviewed. And those of you that are type 2 diabetics, don't tune out because he has some powerful things to say that apply to all diabetes. But this is an amazing man who has achieved a success with diabetes that very few type 1 diabetics do. So I am happy to welcome to Beat Diabetes a man by the name of Adwan Shahada. Adwan, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed.
Thank you so much for having me, brother.
Well, it's great to have you, and I was just so blessed and excited and to get to know you and hear your story. It really is amazing, and I don't use that word loosely. Now, most people that are diabetic, they have one of two ways of learning about it. Sometimes it creeps on them gradually over the course of a few years, and each time they go to the doctor, it's a little bit worse, it's a little bit worse, and finally says, you've crossed the line, you're diabetic. In your case, it really wasn't that way. Out of the blue, you thought you were fine for the longest time, and suddenly you had some problems. Tell us how that all began and what it was that got you to the doctors in the first place.
Sure. So basically what happened, it all started July of 2017 towards the end. I was actually on maternity leave because I just had my first daughter June of 2017. And basically just everything was fine. I started my maternity leave in the middle of June and everything was good. And then I would say maybe the last week of July, I just wasn't feeling right. I was going to the washroom a lot, urinating. My vision wasn't the sharpest, but I just sort of just blew it off and was like, maybe who knows what was going on. But then my wife started to notice that definitely something was wrong. And she was like, you don't look right. You're not acting right. Because the thing is about having high blood sugars is you start to have a lot of brain fog. So I just really wasn't always what was going on. And my poor wife actually kept telling me, I need to take you to the hospital. And if not, let me just call the ambulance. And I just kept blowing it off like, no worry, I'll get better in a few days. And sure enough, I was just getting worse. I couldn't drink anything really besides, unfortunately, Mountain Dew. That was the only thing I was able to keep down. And then finally, my older sister, which she does work in the medical field, she just happened to come by that night to visit. And she just said, you look horrible and what's going on? And long story short, she had a glucometer in her car and she went to go get it. And she tested my blood sugar and it just read high. So that basically means the blood sugars were over 600 at that point. So she was like, I have to rush you to the hospital right now. And of course, I didn't know what was going on. So I agreed and I went. And when I got to the hospital, my sister told them she just tested my sugar. And they tested it there. Of course, they have a better meter. And it actually read 1,205.
Okay, wait a minute here now. 1,205. Adwan, I've never heard of such high blood sugar. How in the world were you even able to function? And You know, you mentioned that your wife and your sister both looked at you and said you looked terrible. What was it about your appearance that was alarming them? Was it the color of your skin was lighter, or your eyes were droopy, or what was it that they saw when they looked at you and said you look terrible?
Yeah, no, definitely. Just like my eyes started to darken and swell a little bit. Just my appearance, I dropped weight. Like I guess like within a week, I dropped maybe like 10 pounds. And of course, I didn't notice, but they definitely did. And they're just like, you were just pale and definitely looked very ill. Definitely looked very ill.
Okay. So, yeah, and with the your sister's meter, it just said high, which means the meter can't read it. It's, and anytime you get a reading that says high, you're in big trouble. But the hospital could read your glucose, and it was over 1,000. They had to have been shocked themselves by such a high reading.
You know what? I had three or four doctors come up to me, and they were just like, we don't even know how you're standing up right now. You're supposed to be in a diabetic coma right now." And they were explaining it to me. I really didn't understand, I mean, like, of course, everybody knows about diabetes, but unless you specifically know somebody that has it or you read about it, you're not going to know much about it. So one doctor told me that their machine at the hospital only goes up to 1,500. So they've never seen a number like that. And basically, we're reaching very, very dangerous levels. I was told that, I could have passed away very easily, because it's hard to pump blood that thick.
So you actually set a record at that hospital. You were the highest glucose that they had ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, no doctor there seen blood sugars that high, for sure.
Wow. So I'm sure they had a lot to say to you. Tell us some of the things they told you when they came back with the news that you had a blood glucose over 1,000 milligrams per deciliter.
Well, basically, they didn't know exactly what was going on at first. I was just being told, it could have been just because of stress or something like that, because maybe I just had my first daughter, and they just didn't know. But they all assumed, because I was in the hospital, I was in the ICU for 5 days, and everybody just assumed that it was going to be type 2 diabetes. So they're coming back and forth by me, and multiple times a day, just basically telling me, after I get released, after the blood sugars are calm, or they went down, to just basically take it easy, drop a little bit of weight, and I basically should be fine. But this is them assuming that I was a type 2 diabetic. And my last day in the hospital, they ran what is called a GAD test, a GAD blood test, which basically shows something about the islets. I'm not quite sure off the top of my head, but that shows whether it's going to be a type 1 diabetic or a type 2 diabetic. So literally, on my last day at the hospital is when they realized that I was a type 1 diabetic. And that's the reason why my blood sugar skyrocketed so much, because I couldn't, even though I wasn't eating anything, I wasn't able to drink water. And the only thing I could keep down for about a week was only Mountain Dew. And little did I know, I didn't have any insulin. I wasn't producing any insulin as a type 1 diabetic to get rid of the blood, or get rid of the sugars out of my blood. So it was just stuck there. And every time I would use the washroom, every time I would urinate, it would basically always come out clear, which I thought that was pretty odd. You would think it was going to be more so of a yellowish tint, because you're drinking Mountain Dew, but it was clear because the sugar was not able to get out of my bloodstream.
So they're telling you that you are a type 1 diabetic. Did you know enough to know that, I mean, that's kind of worst case scenario for a diabetic?
Yes, yes. No, I definitely knew nothing about it. I didn't know there was a difference. I just thought diabetes was diabetes at that point. And I was diagnosed very late. I was 32 years old when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I'm almost 35 now. So that was rare in itself. So that's what threw them off, because usually type 1 diabetes is a juvenile diabetes, where you would get it when you were younger. So that really threw them off and mind boggled them.
Yeah. So and they kept you in the hospital 5 days. Apparently, they couldn't bring your blood sugar down very quickly.
No, no, not at all. Not only were my sugars high, I was severely dehydrated. So it took about 25 bags of IV fluid just to get me hydrated, and then a ton and a ton of insulin. Literally, nurses were just coming round the clock checking my and I had no idea what was going on exactly at that point because there was a lot of brain fog. So you really don't know exactly what's going on when the sugar levels are that high. Um, but with what I remember, and I actually had like the results, um, it would go down to like about 1,000, then it was down to like 950. It was slowly but surely going down, until finally the last day, where they got it down to like almost normal levels. I was like in the upper 100s, mid 100s. I had a diabetic nurse come in to basically explain everything about what was going on and how I'm going to have to take care of myself for the rest of my life because this is definitely a lifelong disease.
And she was the one that told you you were type 1 diabetic.
Yes. Well, a doctor actually told me that I was a type 1 diabetic, and then she came after to basically, explain to me about the medications and exactly, how to eat, which, I was hoping that was going to be beneficial, but unfortunately, when I was released from the hospital and utilized what these medical professionals told me to do, that night that I was released, I actually almost died again.
Okay, you died because of why?
Okay, so basically what happened was when I was released from the hospital on the fifth day, it was around maybe like 6:30 at night. Um, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna have a meal. And basically what she told me was to basically every meal I take or every meal I eat to inject myself with 12 units of what's called fast acting insulin. And then every night before I go to bed to inject myself with 36 units of long acting insulin. Okay. Which I had, I was just following their instructions. So that night I had a pretty light meal, I was in the hospital for 5 days, just getting caught up with everything. So I had a light meal, but I definitely took my medication as I was told. And that sort of insulin being injected in, you have to eat a lot of carbs, and I didn't because I really didn't. The way she educated me, it was very subpar to say the least. So basically, at about 10:30 at night, I just woke up in a drench of sweat, and I grabbed my glucometer that they gave me, and I checked my sugar, and I believe it was 37, which is very, very low. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, I just didn't know what was going on. I was very dizzy. So right away, I opened up my fridge and took out some orange juice, guzzled that down, and after I started to recuperate, after my sugar levels started to go up and I started to feel a little better, I told myself, I just have a new daughter. She was at that point just not even 2 months old. And I'm like, I'm not going to live my life like this. And that's when I started to do my research. I didn't want to just take what they told me to do. And because obviously it just didn't work at all. And I just took it upon myself to do my own research and just try to live as healthy and as fit as possible with the lowest amount of medication possible.
Yeah, let's go back and talk a little bit more specifically about what you were told. You were, obviously anybody who's a diabetic and goes to the hospital is going to get some advice, going to get some counsel about diet, or at least they should. What specifically did she tell you in terms of diet?
So basically, she was just like, you want to watch your carbs. So at least that was told to me. But how to watch my carbs, I'll be quite honest. I really didn't even know the difference between carbohydrates and proteins. And, obviously I know what proteins are and all that, but I didn't know exactly carbohydrates meant sugar, because when you don't have an illness, you're really not going to research it much because there's really no purpose to. So yeah, she just basically said to watch my carbs and at every meal take 12 units of insulin, And just before I go to bed, just take 36 units of long-acting insulin. And she made it seem like, I'm going to live this happy and peaceful life with this disease.
So she didn't really tell you about counting carbs or taking more insulin for more carbs, less insulin for less carbs. Basically, she just said every meal you're going to take so much insulin.
Yeah, like basically on my insulin box, like on the medication, that's exactly what it said. 12 units of insulin per meal. I believe she did mention to me like at for every like 10 carbs, take a certain amount of insulin, but nonetheless, on my medication, it specifically said just literally 12 units of insulin, each meal. And then at night, 36 units of long-acting insulin. But you know what? I will give them this. They did give me a card for another nutritionist to reach after I was out of the hospital if I had any questions or concerns about anything, and that's about it.
Okay. So you didn't really come across the impression, you didn't really get the impression that you try to match your fast-acting insulin with the number of carbs that you eat at your meal. In your mind, you just eat a meal, take so much insulin.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, no clue whatsoever.
Yeah, and that just about killed you because you ended up with a hypo.
Oh yeah, severe hypo. Yes.
Yeah, which is something that type 1s often do experience, especially those who eat a lot of carbs, or in your case, take a lot of insulin and don't eat many carbs. So you get home and you've had a hypo that's almost killed you. You've had blood sugar up to 1,000 plus that probably should have killed you. You're kind of a walking miracle, by itself. And then you're looking at your life and saying, there's got to be more answers than this, which I have to give you kudos, my friend, that there are answers. So where did you go? What did you do? What was the path you took that helped you to get some serious control and victory in this area?
Yeah, so just like many others, I, started to Google things. I went onto YouTube and just started doing my own research and basically, trying to find like what's the best remedy for being a type 1 diabetic and how to live like the best life. And so basically just I came across quite a few websites. I don't recall what they exactly are because, we're talking about almost 2.5 years ago. But just basically stating this is what hit me the most, the less of carbs that you're going to take in is the less insulin you're going to need. And I knew insulin, how I was taking it, almost killed me. So I was like, I definitely agree. And then I just started troubleshooting. I would have a little meal here and there, inject a few units of insulin. Now, keep in mind, I was not using any fast-acting insulin. I was done with that. After that night, I was like, I'm never using this again. Even though type 1 diabetics do require it, but I was like, I'm going to manage just with the long-acting insulin. So just doing research, I came across your YouTube, which was very beneficial, even though like I know it's more towards type 2 diabetics, but it applies. It really applies.
Yeah, well, that was the question I asked you when we talked earlier. It was like you're a type 1 and our whole channel is kind of centered on type 2, but obviously some things that was being said must have helped you. And what would those be?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just basically, okay, like the video that you had, with the banana and the two bananas and the two candy bars. Um, just that in itself just shows, even though you're a type 2 diabetic and you are producing insulin, still, you see what sugars do. Now, if I had that without injecting myself with insulin, I'm not going to be in the 200s like you were. I'll probably be like in the 5 or 600s. But nonetheless, we're still at levels that, nobody should be in. So that's how I looked at it, whether it was, being in the upper 300s or being in the 5 or 600s. This is not how to live life because we all know that, diabetes, it's just one of those diseases where in time it's going to take its toll on you, and I know people right now as type 2 diabetics, not as type 1s, but as type 2 diabetics that are just having severe health issues. A relative of mine literally has all 10 of his toes cut off.
Type 2 diabetic.
Yes, yes. And he's, I think, like maybe like 44 years old, just this uncontrolled diabetes. And It's just sad. It's just sad.
Yeah. Now, you ran across Dr. Richard Bernstein in your research, didn't
Yes,
you?
yes,
What
definitely,
did you learn from
definitely.
him?
A lot. The biggest thing that I learned from him is just how low of carbs that, us as human beings, I mean, we really don't even need carbs, to be quite honest. But I mean, he's just basically doing like under 20 carbs a day, or maybe 30, I think, maximum.
Yeah, he's normally doing 30 and encouraging his patients to do about 30. I think it's 12, 12, and 6 for the 3 meals, and that's it.
Exactly, exactly. Now, in my case, it just depends. Sometimes I go even less than that, but sometimes I will go more than that. But that's only if I know I want to work out, or if it's, if I have to go shovel some snow, or if it's the summer and I have to do, a lot of yard work. Now, as a type 1 diabetic, remember, I take long-acting insulin. I take about 13 units a night. So that's in my system. So if I'm going to go to the gym, or if I'm going to go do some, intensive labor, let's say in my backyard or something like that, the insulin becomes, it activates basically to the point where it's going to drop me down very quick. It's going to drop my blood sugars down very quick. So sometimes before I go do something like that or go to the gym, I will have maybe like 50, 60 to even 70 carbs just before I do that, because again, as a type 1 diabetic, I have insulin injected in me at night that's flowing for about 24 hours. So sometimes I do need higher carbs. So it is different than a type 2 diabetic in that case.
Yeah, now the one thing that you're so different from most type 1s is most type 1s, they're taking the two types of insulin, the slow acting for, once a day perhaps, and then the fast acting at every meal. You totally gave that up. So that almost, if you're determined to keep your numbers fairly low, you almost have to eat pretty low carb.
Yeah, no, and that's basically like 95% of the time I'm eating very low carb, very healthy eating, just basically vegetables, meats, cheese, eggs. I avoid all the major carbs, bread, rice, pasta. I stay away from all that, cereals. And I don't miss it. That's the best thing. I mean, when I was in the hospital, I weighed about 185 pounds, and now I'm down to about 155. And relatives and friends tell me, like, the irony is, you being sick, quote unquote, you look better than you did when you weren't sick. So I find that pretty funny.
Yeah, what is your height?
I am 5'7".
Okay, 5'7" and 155. Well, that sounds just about perfect.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, no, I mean, definitely, and the thing is, again, as being a type 1 diabetic, I definitely don't want to be super slim, because I do need some fat on my body to inject my insulin, because that cannot be injected into muscle.
Yeah. Now, do you find you're injecting once a day, is that right?
Yes, just before I go to bed. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that impressed me and amazed me so much was just how different your lipid panels look. I mean, tell us what your triglycerides were when you first had found out you were diabetic.
So when I was in the hospital, I believe I was at maybe like 12 or 1300 were my triglycerides. And everything was just failing. I mean, like, I believe I sent you my the stats on it, and everything was low, high, 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 low. It was just, and my kidneys they weren't even functioning correctly at that point as well. So yeah, I was basically just pretty beat up.
Yeah, everything that could go wrong was going wrong with you, and had that continued much longer, you wouldn't be here on this earth. But you found some answers. Now, so your triglycerides were like 1200, which, again, that's about as high as I've never heard of anybody with that high of triglycerides.
Yeah.
What are they today, Adwan?
Today, my last reading, I believe, was 67.
67. I mean, I'm happy to have you on this program, because you deserve a platform to start shouting to the world, what has happened. And it was other aspects of your lipid profile that also improved. Tell us about some of the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just literally everything from my HDLs are currently like at 59. My kidneys are completely normal functioning. My cholesterol levels are all perfect. The last time, which was a couple months ago, when I was at my endocrinologist's office, I mean, he was just like, just basically, your lipid profile is that of an athlete's. That's how amazing it is. Yeah. So, and the A1C went from 9.7 at diagnosis. Now it's down to 5.8, which amazes him because I'm only taking the long acting insulin. And he was like, your numbers are better than my type 2 diabetic patients. So he's just amazed himself.
Well, yeah, there are many doctors that don't encourage and don't even seem very happy for their diabetic patients, to, especially type 1s, to even try to get it down lower than about 7. And yet here you are in the 5s. You made it into the club, my friend. You're in the 5s club, and you're a type 1. There are a lot of type 2s that aren't in that club yet, but hopefully they'll get there. So you how you told us about how you slash the carbs in your diet, you cut out the starches. A lot of people, that's the one thing that's bothering them. They know enough to give up the candy bars, but they're not so happy about giving up the potatoes and the rice. How long did it take you to figure all that out? Was that something you had figured out within a few weeks or a few
Yeah.
months?
No, literally, I believe it was just maybe, yeah, like 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, another huge benefit that I had was I was on maternity leave, so my employer gives us 4 months, so that helped tremendously because I had all the time in the world. My wife was taking care of our daughter, and I was definitely helping her with that as well. But that gave me all the time because basically I was out of work. My daughter was born June 16th, and I went back to work. I think maybe like October 10th, and I was diagnosed towards the end of July. So I had almost 2 months to figure this out, brother. 2 months. So that definitely was a blessing.
Yeah, that sure was, and you did it. And I would assume you were testing yourself a lot, and you must have been seeing these numbers going down as you began to adjust your diet.
Yes, yes. And the biggest thing that stuck, and just like you do on your channel, and you basically eat higher carb foods just to show people basically what it does. Just one time I was like, let me see exactly what this type 1 diabetes is. Let me see what this beast could really do. So even though I was on my long acting insulin, I had a large bowl of frosted flakes. I can't tell you the carb count off the top of my head because I'll never do this again. But anyways, I did have a large bowl of frosted flakes, and I checked myself, I believe, after maybe like 30 to 35 minutes, and I was already above 300. So, and keep in mind, I started in the 80s. So within 30 to 35 minutes, I was above 300. And then I just didn't even check I didn't want to check anymore. Right away, I went outside, started jogging, because again, it was summertime. And then the next day, I had salad, checked myself. And it was literally like, if I believe I checked myself, I might have been in the low 100s or high 90s. And after my chicken salad, I think I was in the 80s. And I was like, okay, light bulb goes off. This is it. Yeah, and I mean, it's sad. It's so sad that especially us as type 1 diabetics, we're told, just take this, wear this insulin pump, fill it up with insulin, eat whatever you want, just count the carbs and inject. And like I was telling you over the phone before, Dennis, I have friends that literally have insulin pumps, and one of them A1Cs are in the sevens, another one's in the nines, another one's I believe is in the sevens as well. And now, if they were getting results in the very low fives or high fours, I would give them kudos, and I might even think about transitioning to a pump because it's doing wonders. But obviously, it's not working. It's not working. They're injecting tons and tons of units of insulin basically just to have a candy bar or a large slice of pie where literally the taste is going to be in your mouth for just a few minutes. So in my head, it just doesn't make sense. It's not even worth it.
Yeah, it makes no sense at all. Now, Adwan, you mentioned before this Frosted Flakes, you had numbers glucose in the 80s, and then you mentioned sometimes you're in the 90s, hundreds. I mean, there's a lot of type 2s that would love to have those kind of numbers that don't ever see them. Are you seeing those kind of numbers regularly just on this long-acting insulin that you're taking once a day?
Yes, yes, definitely. I mean, this is a day in, day out. This, I was told early on by I have the same endocrinologist that was actually in the hospital with me when I was diagnosed. So, he just basically told me, like, like what you're doing is, it could be dangerous, and, eating low carb, like, I don't, sometimes I just wonder that if these medical professionals, just like you said, maybe they're just scared, to have a severe hypo, or just maybe they're just getting, paid a few bucks, selling this insulin and these insulin pumps. But, I basically told them, I'm a grown man. I will definitely take care of myself. And ever since then, and I actually told him another thing that I just remembered. I told him, I understand that you are a medical doctor, and you're a diabetes doctor, but nonetheless, you're not a type 1 diabetic. You don't live through this, day in, day out. Diabetes never sleeps. It doesn't take a day off for Christmas or Easter or anything like that. It's a 24/7, 365. And yeah, he just agreed with me. He's like, you know what? Your lipid profiles are great. I'm not going to say anything to you anymore. Basically, type 1 diabetics, maybe even type 2 diabetics, but we're always told to get our A1C checked 4 times a year, basically every 3 months. He's to the point where he's like, you come by me every year just to get your lipid profile done. Unless you see something dramatic, he was like, you're better than my type 2 diabetic. So he was like, just kudos to you.
Wow, wow, wow,
Yeah,
wow. Well,
yeah,
Adwan, the one really smart thing you did, you did something that many would consider dangerous, and I'm not sure I would have even advised you to do. Not that I have any business advising anybody to do anything, because I'm not a doctor, but to go off that fast-acting insulin, my assumption was, you just have to do it as a type 1. But the one thing you did that was so smart was you took your meter with you on the journey you were going, and you
yes,
checked and you
yes,
watched those numbers and you found out what works for you. And,
yes,
I mean, ultimately the meter is going to tell you if you're doing well or poorly. And you
yes,
figured out something that works. We're not trying to say every type 1 diabetic ought to do it the exact way you're doing it, but boy,
sure.
it sure seems to be working for you, as even your own endocrinologist has admitted.
Yes, yes, definitely, definitely. And that's what we want to do. We want to do, what's best for us. I will never encourage somebody to do exactly what I do because, again, we're not medical doctors. But I will definitely give anybody, and I gave numerous people advice on what I do because, the meter doesn't lie, and I've heard you say that multiple times. The meter is not lying. So, people could, I've had friends and relatives look through my meter, and it's just like, consistently, I think the highest numbers that are in my meter are probably, like, at this point, maybe 130.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, I just keep it, very low carb.
Folks, let me remind you, we're listening to a man whose pancreas produces zero insulin. He makes no insulin, so for him to be able to keep numbers that low just by taking the long-lasting insulin is really incredible. Well, Adwan, you must be feeling really good about your situation and really thankful to have come as far as you have.
Definitely, definitely. It's definitely a blessing. Definitely a blessing.
Yeah, give a word of encouragement to, I always try to give a word of encouragement to the newly diagnosed diabetics. Just talk to them and give them some encouragement right now.
Sure. Now, as type 1 diabetics or type 2 diabetics, it's the name of the game is very simple. It's just low carb. It doesn't have to do with anything else. I mean, working out, exercising is definitely beneficial, but if you're not going to lower those carbs, if you're going to continue eating how you're eating, nothing is going to change. No medication is going to help you. Again, I'm not a doctor. I know Dennis is not a doctor, but nonetheless, please do your research and understand the only way to get rid of this disease or, get rid of its side effects is to go low carb, plain and simple. There's really nothing else to say. I mean, you could have your, you could continue going to Walgreens and CVS and think they're going to save you, but the reality is your best medicine is your grocery store, plain and simple. Your best medicine is your grocery store.
Well, I'm just guessing that your wife is really thrilled with the change in your health. I know she was
Yeah.
worried about you a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes, we go back to that day and, how, it broke her down. And she's like, I just can't believe you didn't listen to me. She wanted to call the ambulance so bad. And so, I apologize for that.
Oh, yeah, as well you should.
Okay.
Some of us hard-headed men don't listen to our wives nearly as much as we ought to. Well, Adwan, thank you so much for being on our Beat Diabetes program, and I know you're going to bless a lot of people, not only type 1s, but type 2s as well. We just thank God for your success and the victory that you have seen. And the good news is, Adwan, you're not just some exceptional case that you can do it, but hardly anybody else could. I mean, I'm assuming that's your attitude as well, right?
Yes, definitely. Anybody could do it. Anybody could honestly do it.
Yeah. If you've got enough will to say no to mashed potatoes and sugar-frosted flakes and chocolate-covered donuts and big mounds of rice, you're on your way. So thank you, Adwan, for being on. We appreciate you. You're a great guy, and you're going to bless a lot of people.
Thank you so much, brother, for having me.